Thank you for this opportunity. It's not easy to be the last speaker before lunch, because I believe everybody is now thinking about the food. So I will try to be brief. I would just like to mention a few basic things first. It was mentioned in my introduction that I am an economist, and also it is a part of my task to give a little bit of a summary of what has been said so far. So I actually read the abstracts of the presentations beforehand, and we are also trying to prepare some form of publication which will summarize all the presentations so that hopefully everybody will be able to understand our opinions and how we see the future of Europe. So, first of all, I would like to speak about three things: the criticism of Brussels, the further development of the EuCET network, which doesn't require a lot of explanation, and last but not least, about the media connections, which is the second publicity, which I consider very important. So let me jump on to the first topic. A lot has been said about the criticism of Brussels, and I don't want to repeat the previous speakers. I want you to know that I lived in Brussels for a few years. And you could hear about other people's experiences in Brussels, like Mr. Juvin. And I had the same experience as many others who have already spoken, that I could see the centralization of power. And the last major treaty, the Lisbon Treaty, doesn't allow a lot of things that were previously allowed. So there is a so-called legal activism, which means that certain institutions have a lot of opportunities. For example, the European Court has very precise definitions of what they mean by European values and European principles. And from their publications, it is clear now, in their documents, it is clear now that they have a different definition of European values than we do. And actually, something I would like to cite from José Manuel Barroso, former president of the European Commission. He said it in a press conference where I happened to be present, because it was at the time when I lived in Brussels, and I remember there was an uproar when he said this thing. So anyway, he said something, and the people didn't really like the idea, and then his secretary jumped in, and he tried to explain immediately that you don't have to imagine it like this or that. So he tried to give an explanation. But also a lot of people mentioned the Frankfurt School. There is an underlying ideology of the Frankfurt School that wants to get rid of our traditions, our historic legacy, our cultural legacy, and it is supplemented by the open society idea that comes from Karl Popper, which is also taken over by George Soros, born in Hungary but lives abroad. And they try to expand the open society. The reason I'm mentioning it is that we have to step up against these on a scientific level. There is a Chinese proverb that says that if we want to defeat a tiger, first we have to defeat it in our head. So first of all, we have to be sure about ourselves. We have to be sure that we are right. And we also need to have a scientific apparatus behind us which can step up against these phenomena, for example, by organizing conferences like this one in order to spread these ideas. And I believe this could be one of the important tasks for the future, to fight against ideologies. We have also heard about economic and financial problems. Let's just think about the euro. When the euro was introduced, a lot of economists said that it wasn't going to work. And this idea of optimal monetary zones, monetary areas. So, for instance, when we have such different countries like Germany, the Scandinavian countries on one hand, and then Germany, Italy, or Portugal on the other hand, they cannot have a common currency. Because if they want to have a common currency, there are completely different conditions that they would have had to comply with, and there have been quite serious studies about it from the 1970s already. So it should have been taken into account because those studies have already clearly shown it that the euro cannot be introduced the way it was eventually introduced. The studies I'm referring to were published in 1974, 1977 already. So these studies were based on the practices of federalist countries and looking at the concentration of income, the concentration and reallocation of incomes. And they found that at the beginning of the integration, 2% of the GDP, then at the introduction of the euro, 5 to 7% of the GDP should be centralized and reallocated in order for those countries to be compensated who were the losers of the integration. So that's why it could work, because actually nobody wants to give up even 1% of their GDP to the common budget, especially those countries who feel that they get less back than what they pay in. And this is missing from the federalist method or model. And actually a lot of other factors are missing too. And nobody wants to actually pay 20-25% of the GDP to the central budget, which is the case in federal states. Another thing I would like to mention was published in the Marjolin report was that the large majority of the population of the member states should feel that they primarily belong to the European Union. Another survey by the Eurobarometer just last year, 2 years ago. You know, the Eurobarometer is a statistical model or indicator of the European Union. So they run a survey about whether people feel they belong to the European Union or that they only belong to their country, or that they feel they are linked to their country. So actually, about 90% of the people feel that they belong only to their nation and not to the European Union. So the large majority of Europeans feel that they belong to their own nation. And actually, in different European forums, they try to depict us as marginalized and as extremist. But it's not true, because the Eurobarometer survey said that 90% of the people feel similar to us. Another thing that we need to mention is the economic policy, the finance policy, which actually destroyed the European economy. In the 1960s, when we were living behind the Iron Curtain, and we rarely had the opportunity to travel to the West, but when we did, we were marveling the economic models functioning in Western Europe, but it has been destroyed. And now the Union is divided. It is now in two groups, the debtors and the debtees. So actually, it's not true. It's not the countries that are divided, but some circles of power behind the countries. So we have to be very careful not to be deceived. It has also been mentioned that there are problems in Southern Europe, and one of the major problems is that we are now overwhelmed by cheap Asian products. and we need a long-term strategy to tackle this. Also, it has been mentioned that we need to work out a system that builds on local economies. We have to develop the local economies and also trade wherever possible, but we should not risk our security, because it is our security if we have strong local organizations. There is one more thing I would like to mention within this topic. And I'm actually happy to see that Mr. Sakiewicz had just returned to the room, because I would like to talk about a problem that specifically affects Poland and Hungary. And this is about the climate craze. Let me call it that, climate craze. Because Poland has now been punished for this. For example, shutting down that coal mine and that power plant. What the European Union is doing is actually insane. We have to step up against it, and I wrote a book about it. It has been translated into English as well, and I hope that within a Hungarian-Polish cooperation it can also be published in Polish, because the book points out why Brussels is wrong about this climate insanity. And I think it's especially important because if we don't step up against it, then they will force onto us a policy that they are unable to implement. Even the Germans will not be able to implement their current environmental policies. You can already see, for example, by the trends in energy prices. So we will have to get back to this topic, and we'll have to strongly step up against it. The other topic I wanted to talk about is further development of the EuCET network. Only one thing about this topic. We need to have a think tank behind us. We need to have the theoretical background. We have to identify institutions who think similarly to us, and we have to involve them in our work, create a network. And the last big topic I wanted to talk about is the role of the media. It was also in Mr. Sakiewicz's presentation that we again have to create some form of cooperation. So media forms as a second wave of publicity. So we have to let the people know that we are not extremists, we are not fascists. We simply represent the ideology that a majority of European people believe in. It's okay that somebody wants to be German and another person wants to be Italian, but we may still share the same ideology, the same values, and we can be sure that those ideas will benefit all. And just one last thing, because it seems I'm at the end of my time, that Mr. Juvin and his colleagues have drafted a manifesto. And there's just one thing I would like to point out. They said that they would work out 12 points, which they will substitute for the 12 stars of the flag of the European Union. But actually these 12 stars do not represent the Union, it represents the tyranny of Brussels. So let's just say that this star represents national sovereignty. This star represents European traditions, historic legacy. This star represents Christian roots. So we have to re-evaluate. We cannot allow it that they make up symbols for their purposes. So we cannot let them, for instance, to use the rainbow for minority rights representation, because the rainbow symbolizes unity between mankind and God. So, and we speak different languages, but through interpretation, we can still work together if we unite our forces. Thank you for your attention.